This evening, we have with us two speakers. It's a duo, Miss Myra Parsons-Gross and Mr. David Fadeley, two chapter ESEP members that are going to partner tonight to provide us with some reflections on maturing into technical leadership roles. All right. Now, Myra Parsons-Gross has more than 30 years of systems engineering experience. She has a BS in electrical engineering from the California State University, Long Beach, and currently resides in Annapolis. Myra began her career in radar development for Raytheon, formerly Hughes Aircraft, where she joined Westinghouse, or aka Northrop Grumman, to further her career working in a number of big dollar development programs before accepting a contractor position for a small company within the intelligence community. Myra is a certified project management professional and also an ESEP. Dave Fadeley has over 35 years of engineering and project management experience in the U.S. Department of Defense community. He has worked on electronic warfare systems, air and missile defense, cooperative engagement capability systems, IT systems, to include data collection, processing, and producing knowledge for SIGINT and cyber defense. Dave has led projects and teams in public, private, and nonprofit firms, including at Westinghouse, the Johns Hopkins APL, and also small professional consulting firms. Dave is a registered professional engineer in Maryland and also a certified project management professional and also an ESEP. So now I'm going to turn tonight's presentation over to our speakers. But before I do, I'd like to ask everyone if they wouldn't mind turn off their videos. So we just have the speakers with their videos on. And then I'll turn it over to you, Myra and Dave.
Okay, thanks, Clinton. Guess we do the screen sharing. Are we good? Everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Clinton, did you want to take pictures before or at the end with all the attendees?
Oh, we'll take pictures at the end.
Okay. All right. We'll get started then.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the presentation of this paper, Experiments in Leading Through Influence. And as it says in the title, you can see that it was presented at last year's first virtual IS in July. And 6 of us from the cohort 4, and we'll talk about what cohorts are in TLI. But 6 of us presented this paper. We basically alternated, and it also included Myra and I, of course, from the Chesapeake chapter. And since the chapter presidents had to nominate each one of us, we felt it was only appropriate to present this back to the chapter as a way of giving back. So we're really here to share the results and things that we did in this 2-year program in the cohort. So to mirror how we presented it at the IS and to take advantage of this virtual aspect that we're doing now, Myra and I are going to alternate presenting each slide. And because I'm going to be pushing buttons and stuff like that, I'm going to try to, I'm going to probably turn off my camera as well, so I'm not a distraction.
So this first slide we put together to try to introduce you to the program that Dave and I participated in. We were in cohort 4 of the Institute for Technical Leadership, sponsored by Incose. It is a development program for active Incose members seeking to improve their leadership skills in an open and collaborative environment. The program is 2 years long, and it includes coaching and mentoring to increase self-awareness, identify your leadership style, improve understanding of the complexity of leading, and to provide a path and improvement to the ways you lead through influence. For those that might be interested in the program, you can find more information on the Incose website. Next slide.
There we go. So we're excited to share this paper with you guys, and we encourage you all to take the time to read the actual paper. And I've actually sent it to Clinton and the folks, and I think they're going to post it with the video as well. That because the paper really it's presented as a series of vignettes about technical leadership, and it's from basically 17 participants and part of cohort 4. And what was interesting, it came from across 7 countries, and perhaps even more challenging, a number, like I think we had 9 time zones, and it ranged from the mountain time in the US through Europe to the Eastern time in Australia, and of course Eastern time in the US as well. And the lead off at Chris Brown, this is what he stated about this. He quoted, I quote him, he says, "When I tell my colleagues that I've just been part of a 17 author paper, I'm usually met with a knowing groan. But to be completely honest, this was a thoroughly enjoyable experience as the paper's lead. We were also told that the rest of the cohort enjoyed this experience as well." So we think indeed the paper is this greater than the sum of its parts, and all the authentic experiences and viewpoints of the technical leadership cohort. And if you look on the top row, you'll see a picture, that we were part of this. There's me in the center and Myra off to the far right.
Okay, so as Dave said, there were a number of vignettes and they were broken down into 5 themes. And each member of the cohort was given a series of short prompts about activities and key ideas we had experienced as part of this TLL program. And each of us wrote a 200 to 300 word reflection on our experience against one of those prompts. Our reflections were then collated into emergent themes. Those vignettes became the voice of our Incose Symposium paper. The themes that organized the paper were building technical leadership awareness, navigating the tension between power and influence, benchmarking performance for shared development, and lastly, developing capacity around transition and change, followed by creating a group of critical friends.
So before we take you on the journey of these 5 themes, as system engineers, we all appreciate understanding where it is that we're trying to end up. So our journey started with considering technical leadership in the context of something called a Sinofin framework, which you may or may not be aware of, but it's a framing of leadership that has great value when considered in the complex domain, where there are no clear answers to problems. And instead, we need to follow a practice of probe, sense, and respond to navigate situations. Or another way to look at it is try, watch, and act. TWA is another way of thinking about it as well. So our takeaway message can broadly be summarized by the realization that it's easier said than done, but observations from our experiments might provide some insight into how this can be achieved. Basically, a technical leader needs motivation, curiosity, and common sense to be able to accurately probe a given situation. Then when sensing, there's great importance in the skills of thought sharing, reflection, seeking contributions, and really to enact a response actually requires energy to inspire the action and deliver on the activity. So at this point, I'm going to start working through these 5 themes that we just presented on the previous slide.
Okay, so the first theme was building technical leadership awareness. To be an effective leader, one must be aware of the context in which they are trying to lead or influence. Technical leaders simply cannot have organizational power on all the edges they need to master. Building an effective leader requires the ability to have impact in the technical and non-technical domains and within the entire scope of the organizational effort. Hence, the ability to influence outside of the technical area is a core competency of the technical leader, specifically the ability to lead from the inside. Developing leadership skills requires the tools to analyze, a mindset of self-reflection, and a network of leaders, mentors, and mentees to exchange ideas and perspectives. These provide the structure to understand an engine to progress and to fuel the feed the leadership journey. Building awareness of technical leadership skills is not limited to the early career stages or future leaders only. Honing leadership skills is an opportunity to reevaluate and identify edges to grow no matter what stage you're in your career. A cohort member reflects on the value of refreshing her awareness of leadership in a technical field and the effect of doing this in a global team. Having the opportunity to reassess your current leadership style and how others see you in that role is important in a professional team environment. This applies to all levels of technical leadership, not just emerging leaders. Our technical field remains dominated by Caucasian males, and the TLI provided an opportunity to work with a much more diverse group of engineers, including nationalities, cultures, different technical backgrounds, and skills. This diversity of thinking and ideas highlights how important it is to recognize alternative leadership approaches. The awareness of nuance between positional and expert power as a technical leader was an important point of differentiation for many in our group. The concept of leading from the inside highlights an important concept that shaped our journey, the tension between power and influence.
So the members of the cohort, we ran experiments. Well, actually, we all ran experiments in our workplaces and realized power does not necessarily lead to effective influence. So the 5 types of power identified here, the physical, resource, positional, expert, and personal, were a cornerstone for many of these experiments in leading through influence. Reflections on these experiments focused on the realization that having power of any sort really does not translate clearly into a ready capacity to influence others, which is really the goal. Someone with high levels of expert power may not be effective without the resource or positional power to exercise that expertise. So one cohort member reflects on the benefits of recognizing different types of power. And it's a quote. It says, "In my role as a senior consulting SE, I needed to create positive influence, make an impact, and influence appropriate change. This includes engaging willing and unwilling players. Acknowledging the power structures is important to influence the change. I found that without the positional power in an organization, expert power is to be earned through time by job performance and demonstrated knowledge, not merely through credentials. Further, personal power is to be earned through building relationships incrementally over time by building rapport with all concerned. However, structural challenges make influencing difficult, such as access to key personnel and facilities. An amount of expert power can open a door to an opportunity, but focusing on that growing personal power is required to be effective and, of course, sustain that influence with key stakeholders. Coupled with the 5 types of power or personality types of those involved, the personality of technical leader and those who the technical leader is attempting to influence. On this topic, we consider the 4 personality types in the DISC profile. And another cohort member had this to say about that. He says, he was trying to influence some coworkers, and he said this: superiors who tend to be in a dominance profile usually control the resource. The customers are often in a dominance or influence profile because my work is based around technical matters, and my customers tend only to engage me in technical matters. Projecting technical excellence and confidence has been very effective in this situation. Another one said, even when a leader holds positional power, influencing members of a team who hold expert power in their technical domain can be challenging. Another cohort member described the response he received when trying to influence domain experts when they're trying to learn system engineering processes. And one thing he said, he said, quote, "I applied expert power to conduct in-house systems engineering process training, followed by personal power to encourage members of the team to take the Incose ESEP exam. I connected emotionally with the members of the team by explaining the value of the knowledge, certification, and adherence to standards." It says now 5 out of 7 are SEPs, allowing the organization to continue and increase the level of confidence of its engineers. And there's many, many more, by the way. Vignettes in the paper talk about this. So really, to summarize, the appropriate type of power and awareness of the key personalities involved really leads to effective influence.
Okay, so the third area that we covered was benchmarking performance for shared development. So in addition to the DISC assessment that Dave just mentioned, we engaged in a process of 360-degree feedback with our managers, coworkers, direct reports, and a self-evaluation within our own organizations to benchmark our own performance. This exposed us to the sectors in the Johari window, in particular to the elements known to ourselves, and more importantly, to the elements that are unknown to ourselves. Because the questions on the 360-degree tests were the same for everyone, we found a common starting point to share experiences and reflections, even in a diverse group as we were. A cohort member describes the value of receiving this feedback as, I was forced to evaluate preconceived opinions on my leadership ability and identify areas in which to grow. My biggest takeaway from this experience is that leaders at all levels can benefit by using this 360-degree tool. The Leadership Practices Inventory, LPI, which is a framework on which the 360-degree is based, focuses on 5 practices of exemplary leadership: modeling the way, inspiring a shared vision, challenging the process, enabling others to act, and encouraging the heart. Within our group, we each identified areas within our feedback that required development and formed small subgroups, and we continue to have discussions remotely with our weekly meetings during our time with the cohort. The concept of shared development extended beyond the group for many members. One cohort member describes, while being in the TLI is a full opportunity for personal reflection and identification of areas to improve on, what has been most important has been the way in which the team around me in my own organization has enabled my journey of learning. These discussions have provided me with opportunities to think about good technical leadership together with my colleagues. This highlights how a culture of open technical leadership within an organization can help foster a change culture within our organization.
So in a technical organization, change is the normal state of activity, be it with technology, management approach, or projects through the life cycle. And adapting to this change is a key opportunity to apply technical leadership skills. Another cohort member, who's in aerospace and defense, reflected on his experience as his own organization transitioned management and product line approaches. And he was talking about soft and hard skills. And in one of the quotes he says, during this time, I engaged different types of influence by tailoring communication to personality profiles of employees. As engineering organizations move away from these highly structured, heavily documented organizational structures to more flexible, team-oriented, model-based, the application of informal influence becomes even more prevalent. So technical leadership skills are useful in a transitional period within an organization, but are also transferable across organizations. Another cohort member who's in the tech sector in the US describes how she moved to a new organization and encouraged her new team members to run experiments on how to help the organization adopt these new system engineering things. And this is what she says. She says, quote, shortly after taking the opportunity to change companies, I was given a team of strong system engineers and a task to grow the system engineering discipline within our organization. By using the probe, sense, respond technique, we ran small experiments across the organization to see how the org reacted. This enabled us to coalesce around techniques that work, such as role definition within each project, and avoid techniques that did not work, such as formal diagramming or strict sequencing of activities. So through those experiments, they tailored to what they could use in their environment. And recognizing, and there's another story. It says, recognizing that the context of broader societal factors is constantly changing is also important to the technical leader. This includes cultural factors, generational change, and the modes of communication that go along it. It's a large consideration of how a technical leader can be effective. As a cohort member out of Singapore he said, for example, in an Asian environment, showing respectful behavior towards people, like listening attentively, speaking not aggressively, agreeing politely to avoid embarrassing my stakeholders, all go towards increasing my chances of success. When conveying instructions to a Gen Z, it's far more effective to send a text message with mobile slang, whereas a Gen X would prefer a face-to-face briefing and an explanation of the rationale behind it.
So the last theme, creating a group of critical friends. Networking to meet new and interesting people supports life experiences, work experiences, learning experiences, exposure to diversity, and decision-making. Lessons learned, both yours and others. These provide you with the opportunity to meet critical friends. Next. So we gained needed perspective through discussions and feedback from our cohort, experience leading our various projects, observing fellow cohort leaders, listening intently without judgment, and acting as sounding boards in an environment of trust. TLI peers provided the high-level outside perspective and support needed. Our TLI cohort members are now trusted advisors with such cultural, personality, and experiential diversity. Together, we are vested in a journey of challenging growth, helping each other. So this training has also introduced the mindset of purpose-driven experimentation in complex environments. The blend of tools and techniques used in these experiments as ways to interpret the world around us help overcome inherent human biases that are present in our decision-making processes. Having a group of critical friends is a safe place to share your true feelings about each situation, rather than exposing yourself to biases and networks in our home organizations. So as a group, we were working on developing our innovation practice in our organization. Because of the stress involved in trying to balance life and work, we often have little time devoted to being reflective and instead spend most of our time in the performing state. So we must take time to stop, get off the train, and reflect and think. This process will help us navigate obstacles in our work. Building relationships with people from different cultures, backgrounds, and experience stories helps us to recognize the need for considering technical leadership as a point of personal development. Since some companies are global entities, we are often working with people across cultures and languages, which can present problems in understanding ideas or solutions because of the broad diversity. Once we can identify our strengths and weaknesses, we should lead with our strengths and follow with our weaknesses. Developing team continuity and stability is most successful when each person is executing tasking associated with their strengths. Communications can be the key to successful performance. Knowing and understanding your skill set is especially important to knowing when to ask for assistance for help to achieve your success when you are performing from a weaker skill.
So as we bring this session to a close, a number of challenges or lessons that I want to prompt you to formulate questions for us. And I'll share some of these lessons that our cohort has also observed. One of the great challenges, of course, is that our TLI experience over 2 years, it's a 2-year commitment, has not only shared over these multiple time zones, but also with all of our day jobs. Everybody was employed in regular full-time engineering jobs. And some of the vignettes in the paper describe the disruptive effect of the TLI has had on these day jobs, with many early and mid-career members making significant career moves due to the conversations that the group has had. So for future members of TLI, but also for any global community, we have 4 key areas to help make your experience enjoyable. And these were some of the challenges in these first 4 bullets, such as making time to participate, when we certainly have day jobs going on, stay engaged outside the defined contact points, which meant we typically would meet through virtual meetings all throughout, sometimes during the day, and people are all over the world at different time zones, and it was hard to stay engaged, as we needed to be. So it was a challenge to do that. Determine end goals, realistic plans to accomplish them, and collective ambition is people really want to do a whole lot, and we had to really de-scope and rein things in, kind of the classic planning process to figure out what we could actually accomplish given the resources, the people's time, and what was left in doing it. So further, keep in mind our observations that for a technical leader to realize leadership through influence, we also need to understand that because of the complexities involved, the probe, sense, respond with a Sinefin framework paradigm is what we really had to use to make this thing happen. So ultimately, we hope that this presentation has shown that indeed it's reasonable expectation that something like an Incose TLI can be a vehicle for influencing the future of SE leadership, but especially when you work in these complex situations.
Okay, to summarize our experiments in leading through influence, I want to recap on the 5 key themes that we spoke about and is elaborated in our paper. Building technical leadership awareness, navigating the tension between power and influence, benchmarking performance for shared development, developing capacity around transition and change, and again, lastly, creating a group of critical friends. We all have the responsibility to pay our technical leadership forward within our communities, organizations, and other areas of our lives. And remember, technical leadership learning never ends.
And with that, we would like to just acknowledge a couple things. Mike Pafford, Grace Crowder, who nominated us from the Chesapeake chapter presidents, all of our cohort 4 colleagues, 2 years of people from around the world, and of course our employers who allow us to do that. And they have 4 TLI coaches. Some of the names you may recognize: Mike Panatti, Patrick Godfrey, Don Jalosh, and David Long actually came in during the middle of our session, our 2-year commitment to also be a coach. So with that, we're open to questions.
Any questions from the audience? Thank you, Myra and Dave.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, since you've
Thank you.
since you've had that training and stuff, is there any what do I want to say, anecdotal or since you've come away from that training, is there any thing that sort of stands out that had a major directional change for you and how you operated?
One thing I'll share is I've taken the 360 feedback, which was one of the assessments we did, and I've taken it a number of times, but I find that the feedback has changed over the years. So I think that these kind of tools are always good to do so that you can make an assessment of where you are or what may have changed in your leadership style to identify what your current weaknesses are. Because we do change, we learn new things, we change, and, just from our experiences in our professional world. So it's good to take it a few times, I would say once every 5 years, to just, re-baseline, see where you are and find out what things work for you, what things you may not be as good at as you may think you are.
Yeah, and I'd say, Clint, for me, it was interesting. We started out with 20 people from all over the world, all different ages, from all different countries. But, there was and interesting enough, there's a lot of common challenges and issues that I think all these folks faced. I mean, the stuff we talk about in terms of, hey, I'm doing system engineering in this organization, but they really don't understand what it is and what we do, and therefore, all the same stuff that we've heard over here in the States. It's the same. They have the same issues going on around the world, and like the one person mentioned about the different Gen X and Gen Z and Y, and it's the same thing is going on. How it is. So it was interesting enough. At first, I thought, man, people are going to be so far off culturally and stuff. I don't know how we're going to relate to this stuff, but it turned out we had a lot more in common, I thought, than I ever expected. And it was quite interesting. And it was a lot of work. I mean, basically, being in this group is like being in an Incose working group. We were meeting. What was it, Myra? Weekly, monthly? I mean, it's got
At least once a month, at least, and often
right.
as we started preparing the paper.
Right. The paper, we were the first group out of this actually to create a paper out of this group. And that was, have, 17, 16 authors or whatever it was. We were getting to the point, we were meeting at the end there quite once or twice a week to make the deadlines and stuff like that. So that's essentially what it is. But you get that experience of different ages and different cultures and around, but there's a lot more commonality that you get in the same challenges that you face leadership wise and even in the system engineering profession.
So you recommend this this challenging program for folks?
I recommend it only because, like I said, I learned a lot about myself. And what I found is that sometimes when you have a challenge or you're having a difficult time trying to address something, you may find it difficult to talk to your colleagues. But in this environment, it was safe. And so, if you had an issue or you've at that given time, maybe you had a problem resolving something that you're dealing with, in your current job assignment. And so that environment was a safe place to talk about that issue and to have other people talk about what they've done or what they recommend. And it's a safe place. It's no preconceived thoughts or no judgment. So it's just a good way to, as we talk about in the paper, establishing a good group of critical friends.
Yeah,
like you said, it's continuation of
Oh,
this,
sure.
right?
Sure.
right. Yeah, and I'd like to. I would recommend it as well for I guess a number of reasons. My first reason for, well, let me put this way: you get people just with a few years of experience, and then there was a handful of us who had quite a bit of experience, even as technical leaders. So I thought, well, I guess I'll go in and I'll give back, and maybe I'll do some mentoring. But it turns out that it was a whole different thing of doing that. We're basically experimenting, trying things in a workplace, experimenting, and then we came back and reported out. I mean, the paper, there was a lot more work that went into. We actually ran experiments and did this stuff within groups and played around with that a lot and tried to figure that stuff out. I mean, basically, you had a bunch of people thrown into a room.
Mm-hmm.
And remember this, Myra, and they said, hey, you guys have to produce. This is what the coaches said. You guys got to produce something. Now go figure that out.
Right.
And so you have a bunch of people from all over the world who barely know each other, right? And then you're sitting there and try to figure out, basically create a plan for what you're going to do, what you're going to do. That was, as you can imagine, that was quite interesting. It took a few hours, because you can have vocal people and these are motivated people want to do something. And of course they wanted to, basically fly to the Mars and back essentially, in the scope. We said, and someone said, we really can't do that in the given the resources we have. So you went through that whole thing, and everybody in there, even people who had experience and knew you really can't do that. You have to de-scope things. But how it came out was we eventually did. And the coaches don't tell you what you got to do. They basically guide you and say, here's the guidelines. Now go figure it out into this big international group who barely know each other. That's how it worked out. And I guess each group they refine it, but I guess they go through a similar thing, and each group talks to each other and and kind of passes on lessons learned and stuff like that. So it is a very interesting experience that way. And so even if you have decades of experience like some of us had or not, I think you can still get a lot out of it as well as contribute to others as well.
Yeah, no, I agree, Dave.
Myra and Dave, that was a very interesting talk. I have a question. I don't know if you in the larger group explored this idea of micro jobbing, where people consult on a task order basis or a task basis and don't have the same sort of allegiance to a large company or a small company or even to a consulting company. They're more free agents. It's starting to become a big trend, especially for the younger generation, and also due to COVID, people are doing multiple jobs, and this micro jobbing is really taking off. So I wonder, did you look at that, and how effective are these leadership and influencing techniques when you don't have the organizational boundary and the idea of an HR department and performance reviews and responsibilities to coworkers? Because micro jobbing is, you're on your own. You're just doing work for hire. Did you guys look into that at all? And what are the trends there?
I'll start, I guess, with that. So hey, Jeff, and it was interesting because a lot of what I did and what I've done in my last few years in career was it wasn't micro jobbing, but it was walking in, because I work for a small company, as you know, and when I walk in like consulting roles, even at big government agencies, I have no support. So I got to start from scratch, which is essentially the environment you're talking about. And that was one of the quotes that's in the or the vignettes in the paper that I'd put in there as well was, hey, you start in and you're considered an expert, right? Because you're walking in for this particular role, like in our case, an SE, but you have no influence. You have no positional authority, right? You have nothing backing you that way. And the experiment, what I know I personally learned over time was that'll get you in the door, but you got to develop those personal relationships. And of course, it takes two to do that, right? Sometimes you can try and it doesn't always work out that way to the other person, but by developing these personal relationships with your clients, your customers, whoever you're working with, is how you really get the influence as your expertise then is allowed to come out. But it doesn't happen in all cases. I didn't observe, and maybe Laura, Myra, you can say at the end here too, I don't recall anybody else saying that in a particular group. If they were in those situations, I think most of them work for, at least the ones I remember, companies that were, that were pretty big. But what about you, Myra? Did you remember any of that?
No, I don't think there was anyone that had that type of work relationship. But like as Dave says, I mean, I work for a small company too, and certainly every time we start a new job, you really have to get in there and understand the team and learn how to influence. You don't have the power to influence. I mean, but your job is that they put you on that job because of your experience, right? And so you can influence just based by, maybe your role that you have, job title, or because you really do have the power or authority, or because you happen to be an expert in a particular area, right? So trying to figure out, what influence tool you can use in a given situation is part of being a good leader.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jeff, and the other aspect was when I've taught classes here, I mentioned this too, is you walk into a situation like that, you have to assess your environment, the environment of the organization, the people, and then pull out, figure out what tools out of your SE toolbox can you use in that environment that's going to help them, right? And it varies. All these variables are quite a bit. And I remember chatting with some of the colleagues there at TLI from different countries, and they resonated with that too, because they again, culturally, like the one person I mentioned, certain people tend to be dominant, certain this and that, and how they look at things. It's more of like, you got to assess the environment you're in terms of people, structure, attitudes, all that stuff, and then see what works in that environment.
Thank you.
Any further questions? People, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any.
Yeah, I have another question for David and Myra. Wondering about feedback, 360-degree feedback, trying to get assessments of how these interpersonal relationships work. We've experimented with those kind of tools before, both within a team and also between customer and supplier or contractor.
Mhm.
And they don't tend to work because it's very hard for people to be critical when it's a small group, because it effectively you're expressing dissatisfaction to almost directly, even though there's a group setting there. And the same goes when it's more of a customer or supplier relationship. A lot of the more meaningful but negative critiquing is missed. So I've seen those abandoned before by companies I've worked for.
Mhm.
Any thoughts around how to get that feedback, productively, but removing the bias that I just described?
So I can't remember if when you're filling out the 360, whether the person can tell how many other participants there are, but if you have a larger pool, obviously you might get a little better feedback because you have more people that you hope would be direct and honest. But you're right, if it's a small group of people, the concern is that, well, if I say this, make this comment, they'll know it came from me, right? So, you'll find that people will be hesitant to be honest.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember too as well, Myra. If we send out, if they told us to send at least X number of people, right? And because
Yeah, I think it was
your
about
response
10.
rate is like, I don't know, 20, 30%, if that much and stuff. But I think that'll vary quite a bit. But I know I've done other stuff in 360 years ago, and it was the same thing. If people think that their stuff will stand out, they may not be as honest and forthright as others. But I think the one we did, we probably said, hey, we're doing this TLI thing. We're
Yeah,
going through this, and we're going to have a thing. So people, it was more of a friendly environment. So I think you probably got higher participation, and that would be my guess.
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
All right. There's no other questions. I want to thank you guys again for providing tonight's presentation.